Chapter 81. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 81. Going home together. Turning towards Adrian, I could see that he was also interested in what was being presented. His vivid green eyes were focused on the presentation and his face was thoughtful. I liked the serious expression that he had on his face right now. It made him seem so mature and trustworthy for some reason that I couldn't explain. My thoughts wandered to the words of women who were busy gossiping together in the women's toilet just now. Honestly, I didn't know what to make of the rumors surrounding Adrian. My first reaction was that it obviously wasn't true. Adrian just didn't seem to be that type of person. Well, not that you could judge a book by its cover all the time. Then again, even if it was true, that really didn't have anything to do with me. Sure, it would mean that I'm such a bad judge of character and I would be sorely disappointed because I had come to really like the guy as one of my clients. Apart from that, I guess it doesn't really concern me who he sleeps with, who he impregnates, and who he dumps. As his contract wife, I could be gone the next day as well. The contract can be terminated anytime. He could have me gone exactly when he decided that he no longer has any use for me. I knew that, but I still couldn't help but wonder if those rumors about him was true. A playboy doctor who messes around with the young and pretty nurses. I glanced over at Adrian, who was still paying close attention to the presentation as I tried to picture him in that role. Well, for sure, he's got the looks and the monetary and social status for it. Elena. I heard Adrian calling my name softly. Why? Yes, I replied, stuttering a little as I snapped out of my thought. I looked up from my seat to see him standing right in front of me, and we were now the only ones in the room. I guess the meeting had ended and everyone had already left. Did I space out for that long thinking about the rumors? I guess you must be tired. Sorry for today, I know the meetings must have been boring for you, Adrian said apologetically before smiling down at me. It's okay. I actually enjoyed the presentation about the international expansion plans, I replied truthfully. I don't know, you seem tired and a little down today. Are you feeling well? Adrian asked with unmasked concern. I'm fine. Is this your last meeting? I asked, quickly changing the subject. There was no way that I could tell him that I had an emotional breakdown pretty much last night and that my worst nightmare returned as well. Yes, it is. Finally, the day is over. Shall we head home? Adrian asked casually. It was casual, and the way he smiled invitingly at me seemed so natural. I nodded and smiled at him while my mind noted his choice of words. He did just invite me to go home with him, right? He offered me his hand and I slipped my hand into his shyly before I offered him one of my best smiles. He smiled back before gently pulling me up from my seat. Adrian didn't let go of my hand until we reached his car in the parking lot. He opened the door on the passenger side of the car for me before he got in on the driver's side. Let's take my car. You can leave your car here, I'll drive you home, he suggested kindly. You don't need to. I'll get a cab or something for the way back, I quickly refused. I won't let you do that. I'll drive you, he insisted firmly. Yeah, well, I don't want you to find out that I live in a run-down building. It wasn't because I couldn't afford a better place right now, but I was satisfied with my small little apartment. I didn't want to have to explain that to him or anyone else though. It's against my policy to have men drive me home, so what about you drop me off at the closest intersection? It's not far off and I can walk the rest of the way, I said, trying my best to compromise while holding my ground. Seriously? Adrian asked as he turned to look squarely at me. I could tell that he was concerned. Yes, I'm sorry. Let's compromise. I asked with a small smile. Adrian hesitated and I could tell that he was far from fine with my proposal. However, after a moment of struggling with himself, he heaved a sigh. Fine, that I'll do things your way this time, he finally agreed. It was a short drive to Adrian's house. Actually, house wasn't the right word to describe his place. A semi-palace or a huge mansion would be more accurate. I stepped out of the car after Adrian had parked at the entryway to his mansion. Immediately, a man dressed in a butler uniform appeared and took the car key from his hand. Adrian smiled kindly to the man as he handed the car key over before turning to me. "Welcome. I know that it's your first time here, but there's no need to be nervous. Just act at home. I want you to feel at ease here, and of course, I'm looking forward to welcoming you here often in the future," Adrian said warmly. "Thank you. You're too kind, really," I replied with a smile. The mansion that I stood in front of was located right at the city center, and I couldn't imagine how much the land alone would cost. In the space where people could hardly afford to buy a small apartment, Adrian owned a massive mansion with a large garden that seemed to stretch on forever around it. It had been a drive from the main gate to the mansion itself. The garden was very beautifully organized and decorated. Many flowers were in bloom, displaying their wonderful colors. The mansion was in what is probably referred to as the Greek Revival style. The building was mainly white and had outstanding decorative pillars matching the Greek style. Overall, it was breathtakingly beautiful and impressive beyond words. To be continued. Chapter 82. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 82. Meeting my new daughter, please come in. "Millie is home already and she's waiting for us," Adrian said as he took my hand in his again. By that time, I had gotten quite used to having him hold my hand, and I had to admit that I did not dislike his touch. Adrian led me inside his mansion, and the interior was as impressive as the exterior. A middle-aged woman who I assumed was a senior maid in the house greeted us politely. "Where is Millie?" Adrian asked. "She's waiting for you in the living room right now with her nanny," the woman replied before smiling politely my way. "This is Elena," Adrian introduced me in short. "It is an honor to meet you, Miss Elena. My name is Gloria and I head the maids in this house. If you need anything, please let me or any of the maids know," the old maid said before bowing politely to me. "Thank you very much. You are so kind," I replied politely. "Let's go," Adrian said as he tugged on my hand for me to follow him. He led me through a hallway that led to a large open space serving as the mansion's living room. There on the sofa sat the little girl that I had met briefly before at the hospital. Millie wore a light purple dress and was playing with a doll. A woman sat on the carpeted floor close to her, and I knew that that must be her nanny. "Millie, I'm home," Adrian called out to his daughter. "Daddy. Welcome home." Millie cried out joyously when she spotted Adrian. We walked over to her, and Adrian invited me to sit down on the sofa next to him. I felt Millie's eyes on me, and from her reaction, I could tell that it wasn't common for Adrian to bring someone home with him. She looked at me with a mix of confusion, suspicion, and curiosity. "Millie, this is Elena," Adrian introduced me to his daughter smoothly. I wondered how I should position myself in front of her. Should I act like I'm his friend for now? "Hello. My name is Millie Amsworth." "It's nice to meet you," Millie replied politely. "It's nice to meet you too. Your father has told me quite a bit about you," I replied before smiling at her sweetly. "Let's be friends please, little one." "Daddy, is she your friend?" Millie asked as she looked from Adrian to me and then back again. Good question. I wasn't sure how Adrian wanted to break our relationship to her. It was also hard for me to predict her reaction. How would a kid her age react to her father having a new girlfriend? "Elena is my girlfriend. I actually brought her here today to introduce her to you. I hope you two would get along," Adrian said as he wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me closer to him. Millie had a confused look on her face, and for a moment I wasn't certain if she understood what a girlfriend actually meant in this context. Her eyes widened as she continued staring at me. "Well, let's have dinner first." "Are you hungry, Millie?" Adrian asked, breaking the uneasy silence. I breathed a soft sigh of relief. Thankfully, Adrian had stopped the conversation by suggesting that we start having dinner. As if on cue, the nanny approached Millie and took her hand before leading her towards the dining room. Adrian held my hand and led me after them. "I don't think we need to rush," I whispered to him. "It'll be okay, don't worry." "Millie understands more than you think," Adrian said before squeezing my hand reassuringly. I wasn't scared about her not understanding the concept. I was scared that she wouldn't accept that I'm her daddy's new girlfriend, plus he wants me to act as her mother. However, she was his daughter, and so I decided to leave this matter entirely in his capable hands. Adrian and I sat opposite Millie at a very large and long dining table that could host at least 20 people as the 3 large crystal chandeliers shone brightly above our heads. Once seated, Millie continued to stare at me from the opposite side of the table. The maids came in to serve us food, but I was too conscious of her stare to pay attention to anything else. "Eat your food, Millie," Adrian instructed a little sternly. Millie nodded a little before she began eating her food. Surprisingly, she was very obedient to her father. "Does the food suit your tastes?" Adrian turned to ask me. "Oh yes, the food is great," I replied, although I couldn't care less what the food tasted like at that moment. Millie glanced over at me while she ate her food. Once or twice, our eyes would meet, and I would smile warmly at her. In response, she would immediately avert her eyes before turning her head away. I guess she doesn't like me. Although Millie's mother passed away when she was very young and she doesn't even remember her, it must still be tough to suddenly have another woman in your life. "Millie, from now on Elena will be part of our family. We can go on holidays and fun trips together as a family. I'm sure that it'll be very fun. Is there a place that you want to go?" Adrian suggested brightly. Millie listened to her father and then her brows drew together as she frowned. Slowly, she placed her utensils down on the plate. "I don't want a new mother. Just me and Daddy together is good enough," Millie said, and I could tell that she was about to burst into tears. I glanced over at Adrian, silently pleading for him to comfort her. However, Adrian did not share my empathy at all. "Millie, we've discussed this before. You need a mother and I have chosen the best woman to fulfill that role. From now on, Elena will act as your mother, and you will respect her and treat her as such. Are we clear?" Adrian said authoritatively. Millie looked at me and then at Adrian before tears streamed down her face. She sobbed a little at first and then she began wailing loudly. Her small fists wiped at her tear-stained eyes and her whole face became red like a tomato. To be continued. Chapter 83. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 83. Persuasion. Her nanny was by her side to comfort her while I watched the whole scene unfold right in front of me. I closed my eyes and took in a deep breath. This has turned into a bigger mess than I thought possible. Why did Adrian have to put it that way? He could have told her nicely. I didn't know that he was so strict with his daughter like this. "Adrian." I whispered his name in shock. I looked at the crying girl and realized that this all started off on the wrong foot. We shouldn't have sprung this up on her like this, and Adrian's strictness did not help. Despite Adrian's best intentions in wanting Millie to have a mother so that she could have a normal family, there was no guarantee that Millie wanted the same thing for herself. "Millie, stop crying," Adrian scolded her in a low voice. Instinctively, I reached out a hand and grabbed Adrian's arm as if to restrain him from causing Millie any more psychological harm and fear. "Adrian, please, you don't have to be so harsh on her," I begged as I stared pleadingly into his mesmerizing green eyes. Adrian looked at me before letting out a frustrated sigh. However, he didn't reprimand Millie anymore. Millie was still crying, and it seemed like her nanny's attempt in calming her down wasn't doing any good. What do I do now? May I have a word with her? I asked Adrian abruptly. Adrian's eyes widened at me in surprise before his face transformed into a look of curiosity. He was probably wondering what I wanted to say to his daughter, and that was a very good question indeed, because at that moment, I didn't really know what I wanted to say to the girl either. All I knew was that if I wanted her on my side, I had to work hard to get her on my side. Nothing that Adrian or anyone said could help build a bond between Millie and me. Are you sure? Adrian asked as he crooked a brow at me. Yes, if you'll allow it. I won't do anything, I promise. I'm just going to have a little chat with her, I replied to ease his worries. I didn't think that you would do anything bad, but as you can see, she's very hysterical and acting very spoiled right now, Adrian said with clear dissatisfaction. I knew that he was mad at Millie's unsightly display, but give her a break please, she's still so young. It's fine. I really want to talk to her. Please. I asked for his permission with a pleading smile. All right. I'll be waiting outside, Adrian said as he finally gave in. On that note, Adrian and the nanny left the dining room together, leaving me and a very distraught Millie alone at the dining table. Great. Now, what should I say to this hysterical little girl? Your father's not here to scold you anymore, so you can stop crying now, I said softly as I looked at the poor girl sitting opposite me. Millie opened her eyes and looked at me before a sudden look of panic crossed her face when she realized that we were now the only ones left in the room. I'm not very good at handling kids, but persuasion isn't a skill that I lacked. Slowly, I got off from my seat and walked over to the other side of the table. I took the seat next to Millie. Although she was no longer wailing hysterically, she was still sobbing. Millie, I'm sure your father didn't mean the things that he said just now. He really cares about you and loves you a lot. He tells me that all the time. I said as I leaned in close to her. Millie did not say anything to me, but I knew that she was listening to me. I decided to continue on. Adrian really wants you to be happy. He worries about you a lot because he loves you. You may think that he's being super strict and mean to you now, but I think you already know that he wants the best for you, I said as comfortingly as I could. I don't want you here with us. Millie said between her sobs. Well, I can understand that. Sometimes I wish that I didn't have to be here either. I just want to pay my debt and simply disappear. You know, I'm not trying to be your new mother like Adrian said. I'm not trying to come between you and your father by joining your family. However, I want to do my best to support you and your father. To be honest, I don't have a mother either. Actually, I don't even have a father. They both died when I was young. I admitted truthfully. You don't have a mom or dad? Millie asked, and I knew that I finally had her attention. That's right. They both died a long time ago. I replied before smiling a little at her. She sniffed and I reached out to grab a tissue and passed it to her. She thanked me shyly and took it. I watched as she blew her nose and thought she looked more mature than her actual age. Are you sad? She asked as she stared at me. I took another tissue and dabbed at the tears in the corners of her eyes before I smiled at her. I was sad. I'm okay now, thank you. I replied truthfully. Usually, kids will do things to please the person that they love or to make sure that that person is happy. In Millie's case, the person that she cares the most about is most probably her father, Adrian. Let's pray that she'll be willing to go along with my plan. I don't have parents, but I wish that I did. Do you love your father? I asked as I looked deeply into her eyes. Millie seems a little shocked at my question, but she nodded her head. Adrian loves you a lot too. You're so lucky to be so well loved. You see, I love Adrian a lot too, I said before offering her a sweet smile. To be continued. Chapter 84. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 84. I love you, you really love my father? Millie asked softly. Of course, I do. I'm dating him after all. Your father is a very kind man. I really love him, and that's why I want to do everything that I can to make him happy. When he told me about you, I really wished that we could get along because I didn't want him to worry. I just want Adrian to be happy, I said. Millie looked at me and her face twisted as a frown formed between her brows. It seemed like she was deep in thought as she considered what I had just said. What about you? Do you want to make your father happy? I asked brightly. BVEC, yes, that I want father to be happy. Millie mumbled in reply. I don't want to replace your mother because I don't think that I can, or that anyone can. So, can we just be friends? I'll take care of you and make sure that Adrian scolds you less. Want to work with me to make Adrian happier? I suggested before smiling down at her. Millie stared up at me with her round brown eyes and I prayed that my words got to her. Okay. Millie replied softly and for the first time she smiled back at me genuinely. Thank you, Millie. I'll work hard to be your good friend, I said happily as I pulled her into a soft hug. If her father was so kind and honest, then there was no reason why Millie wouldn't be kind at heart. I'm done. She's feeling better now too, I reported to Adrian when I opened the door. Adrian was standing right outside the door just as he had said. I smiled at him reassuringly as I invited him back into the room. Please don't scold her anymore. Everything will work out. So please be nice to her. I said as I placed a hand on his arm. Adrian halted in his steps as he looked at me. His green eyes held mine for a moment before he nodded his head in agreement. By the time we headed back inside, Millie had stopped crying and her nanny had cleaned her face. Her eyes were still red from crying, but it was clear that she was in a much better mood than before. Millie, is there a place that you want to go? What about the zoo? We can go see the animals together, I suggested brightly. Will Daddy be happy if we go? Millie mumbled. Adrian looked at me with a confused look and I winked at him. Of course. Let's all go to the zoo. I'm sure that you will enjoy it and Adrian will be happy about it too. I said happily as I clapped my hands. For a moment, it felt like I was the kid in the room and not Millie. Well, whatever works. In the end, somehow, we agreed to go to the zoo together. Adrian gave me a confused look and I reached for his hand under the table and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Dinner passed by smoothly after that to my ultimate relief. Millie dear, it's time for you to go to bed now, the nanny said. Okay. Millie mumbled as she stood up from her seat. Good night, Millie. I'll drop by to take you to the zoo, okay? I promised. Okay. Good night, Millie replied before leaving the room. What was that all about? Adrian asked me when Millie and the nanny were gone. I'll tell you all about it later. For now, why don't you go and wish Millie good night? I'm sure that she'll have a good night's sleep if her daddy tucks her in, I suggested before smiling up at Adrian. I'll take your word for it. Can you wait here? I'll be right back. To hear all about it, Adrian said. Sure. I'll wait for you, I replied. Adrian took my hand and brought me to the sofa in the living room before he took his leave to see Millie. I hoped that things would go well between those two. A short while later, Adrian returned to the living room and judging from the smile on his face, it seemed like things went well between the two. How did it go? I asked. She is sleeping now. Thank you for talking to her, I think she is feeling much better than before, Adrian said as he sat down next to me on the sofa. That's good to hear. Honestly, I didn't quite know what to do when she started crying. I admitted before turning to smile weakly at Adrian. I found him staring intently at me and that was when I realized that we were quite close to each other on the sofa. What did you say to her? I'm very surprised at how fast you managed to turn her around, Adrian said before chuckling softly. I told her that you love her a lot and that you want what is best for her. Then I asked her if she loves you as well. Of course, she told me that she does. Then I told her that I love you and I really want to make you happy. I asked her if she is willing to be my friend so that we can both work together to make you happy. Then she agreed. I recapped the conversation that took place between Millie and me. I smiled a little proudly at Adrian and I was slightly surprised that he was staring at my face. I blinked a couple of times as he kept on staring at me. It made me wonder if I had said something strange. Adrian. I called his name softly and questioningly. Can you say that again? He requested. Say what? I asked, not quite following what he was referring to. What did you tell Millie before you asked her to cooperate with you? Adrian asked as his eyes stared deeply into mine. Is it just me, or is his face getting closer and closer? That I told her that I love you and that I mhmm. I replied before the rest of my response was interrupted. To be continued. Chapter 85. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 85. Permission to kiss. My eyes widened in shock when I felt Adrian's soft lips on mine, capturing my words into his sweet and gentle kiss. The rest of my words got lost in my mouth as I let out a soft moan. His lips continued to kiss mine softly. It was such a tender kiss that made my body tingle with warmth all over. Slowly my eyes drifted close, and I let the warmth of his kiss envelop and take over me. His hands reached up to cup my cheek and I moaned sweetly into his kiss. The tip of his tongue slowly glided out to lick my closed lips until my lips parted a little to grant his wet tongue access to my mouth. Gently his tongue eased between my lips and into the wet depths of my mouth. Adrian sighed with satisfaction when his tongue connected with mine and engaged in a loving dance. He licked my tongue before grinding his tongue against mine as our kiss deepened. I moaned and whimpered into his kiss as he pleasured my mouth with his skillful tongue. His hands slid down my back until he reached my waist. He pulled my body closer to him as his lips crushed onto mine. His kiss got hotter and more demanding. His tongue exploring my mouth relentlessly and I began kissing him back. This is bad that I'm getting so lost in his intoxicating kiss. Suddenly, Adrian ended our passionate kiss before he looked down at me. I felt embarrassed at the state that I was in. My face felt hot, and I knew that I must be blushing red right now. I was also out of breath from our prolonged kiss, and I could still taste him in my mouth. Oh, I'm sorry. Adrian quickly apologized as he removed his arm from around my body. It's okay. I whispered. His green eyes stared deeply into mine and I could see the fire of passion and desire dancing in their depths. Is it really okay? He asked as if in wonder. Huh? I made a questioning sound. For me to kiss you? He asked again. Well, I mumbled, feeling quite embarrassed. I looked down at my lap in embarrassment. Suddenly, his hand entered my field of vision, and I felt his touch on my chin before he began tipping my face up to meet his gaze once more. His captivating green eyes seemed several shades darker than normal, and I couldn't ignore the heat in his gaze as he looked at me. Before I could say anything, his lips pressed firmly onto mine. This kiss was different from before. It wasn't hesitant and I knew that he wasn't just testing the waters this time around. His kiss was hot and demanding right from the start. I moaned into his mouth when his tongue thrusted into my mouth and began mating with my own. He kissed me so deeply that it felt like he was going to devour my entire being. His hand caressed the curves of my body from my waist down to my hips before pulling me against his hard body. My breasts pressed against his hard chest as he continued to kiss me wildly. He only stopped kissing me to change the angle of our kiss. Each time he changed the angle, my legs started getting weaker and weaker as my whole body heated up from his seductive stimulations. We're in the living room and anyone could walk by at any moment, but he didn't hesitate to kiss and touch me at all. I didn't want to believe it, but he's probably a secretly wild one. Adrian. I panted his name as I pushed a little against his chest. You should go home now. Adrian whispered huskily. I nodded quickly in agreement. He's right, I better get home before things get out of hand here. The fire of desire that burned deep in his eyes shone even brighter than before and I wasn't sure how much longer he could hold himself back. I had never seen him like this before. I should go home. I whispered in agreement. "I'll drive you," he said before smiling gently at me. When I got in his car, I feared that things would be awkward between us because of what had just happened. However, I soon found out that I had nothing to fear about that at all. Adrian acted normal as if nothing had happened while he asked me for my address. I gave him the location of the intersection closest to my place as we had agreed. After checking that we had the right pin on the map application, we were ready to be on our way. During the drive, Adrian made small conversation to pass the time, and soon I found myself talking to him with ease like how we always did. "Are you sure that nothing's been bothering you? I don't know why, but I can sense that you're feeling quite troubled and tired today." Adrian asked again. "It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well last night," I replied, quite truthfully. "Let me know if it doesn't get better. I'm a doctor, remember?" Adrian reminded me teasingly. "Okay. I'll let you know." "Thank you, but you don't need to worry about me," I replied reassuringly. "You're my girlfriend, of course, I'll worry about you," Adrian replied firmly. "Thank you," I whispered, not knowing how else to respond to that. It seemed like we arrived at our destination in no time at all. We were both silent as we sat next to each other in the enclosed space of his sports car. Time ticked by silently as the air stilled around us. "I should go," I managed to say softly. I turned to leave, but then my body couldn't move. Something tightened around my waist and held me back. Looking down, I saw that they were Adrian's arms. He hugged me from behind as he buried his face in my long hair. I could feel him breathing in my scent as he held me tighter in his arms as if he was hesitant to let me go. Slowly, his face approached mine and he planted a kiss on the side of my neck softly. "Good night. I hope you sleep well tonight," he whispered close to my ear. To be continued. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 86. Plan for a date. Then his arms released me, and it was like nothing had happened at all just now. "You, too." "Good night," I replied before I closed the car's door. Stepping a few steps away, I waved at him as I watched his car drive off into the distance. Alone in bed that night, my mind was occupied with thoughts of Adrian and what had happened between us. I truly did not expect him to kiss me, and definitely not the way that he kissed me, so deeply and so passionately. The words of gossip from those women that I ran into earlier in the day in the women's bathroom came drifting back into my mind. "He's famous for sleeping around with all the young and pretty nurses. None of them ever last long. Have I somehow ended up with a playboy doctor on my list of clients now? Well, we'll see sooner or later how it goes. At least if I jump on the pill, I won't get pregnant with his child. Wait, what am I even thinking? The contract has a clause prohibiting sexual activity and I'm going to keep it that way. Period." Fortunately, or unfortunately, I did not experience a repeat of the nightmare about my parents' suicide because my mind was too shocked with all that had happened with Adrian and too preoccupied trying to figure him out. That night, I slept quite well, and perhaps, I had Adrian and his distracting kisses to thank. I woke up the next morning feeling much more alive than before, and that was thanks to a night of nightmare-free sleep. My hand reached for my phone to see if Justin had any update for me regarding my work schedule or client demands. My eyes still felt heavy from sleep as I grabbed my phone in my hand and held it in front of my face. "I've already informed Eros's agency about your desire to terminate the contract. So far, there has been no official response. I'll update you if anything happens," that was the message that Justin sent. I wondered how Eros would take the news, but after second thought, I guessed that he probably wouldn't even care about it. After all, this whole fake girlfriend thing was something that his manager and agency came up with. Eros was against the idea from the start, so it must be a huge relief for him now that I'm gone. It's probably best for both of us, so the decision that I made to terminate the contract was probably the right one. It was still early in the morning, but I decided to get out of bed to prepare myself for the day ahead. Today, I'll be working with Brandon, and that meant that it probably won't be an easy day. Lately, none of my days had been easy ones. The clients are truly getting their money's worth out of me, I thought as I stared at my face in the mirror closely. Great, at least my panda eyes are pretty much gone now, and I can save up on some concealer. Ring ring ring, my phone's ringtone caught my attention, and my hand instinctively grabbed the phone and answered it. BL.net, good morning, Elena, a man's smooth voice said through the phone. Adrian. He's calling so early in the morning. Adrian, good morning, I replied as I wondered what he wanted. Sorry for calling so early in the morning. Hopefully, I didn't wake you. Adrian said, sounding apologetic. No, not at all. I'm already up. I quickly replied. I see that so you get up pretty early. You don't seem like a morning person though, Adrian said, sounding thoughtful. You're right, I'm not a morning person, but I have to prepare for work that so yeah. I replied with a soft laugh. Why is he calling? Sorry for taking up your time then. About what you promised Millie. About going to the zoo, would this Saturday work out for you? Adrian asked, sounding very hopeful. I could get Justin to shift things around if I had anything on Saturday, but as far as I was aware, I didn't have any prior engagements, so I should be free. Sure, I think it should work. Is Millie looking forward to it? I asked, smiling a little to myself as I thought of the little girl being excited about going to the zoo with her father. I'm not sure about Millie, but I'm looking forward to it. Adrian said straightforwardly. His directness made me feel slight embarrassed even though we're not talking face to face. I had no idea if the rumors about him were true or not, but I was beginning to understand why women feel so affected by him. You're so funny. I'll see you on Saturday then. Let me work out some plan and send it to you. Like a business proposal. I suggested. Let's call it our date plan, he replied with a laugh. Okay. I'll see you then. Have a good day at work, I replied in a light tone. You, too. Please take care of yourself, Adrian replied, and I hung up. A date at the zoo with Adrian and his daughter, I wonder how that's going to turn out. During my drive to Brandon's office, it felt like something was off, but I wasn't sure what it was. When I stepped foot into the lobby of his office building, I realized that the nagging feeling at the back of my mind was because Brandon hadn't given me a call to nag about where I was. After entering the lobby and looking around, I was even more bothered by the fact that I couldn't spot him anywhere. Usually, he would call to nag me to make sure that I would be on time, and he would be waiting for me here. I was right, something felt very strange. In Brandon's place, a tall lanky middle-aged man approached me instead. He was dressed elegantly in a suit and had moved with grace. I have never seen him before, but it was clear that he had been waiting for me. To be continued. Chapter 87. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 87. Saving a Workaholic. Hello, Miss Elena. Sorry for the late introduction, but I am Mr. Brandon's secretary. My name is Kenneth, the man said politely. I'm Elena. I replied before smiling a little at him. I wasn't here to greet you the last time that you were here because I was out on some errands and I do apologize for that, the man said humbly. That's not a problem at all, I replied. It was honestly very surprising that Brandon had a male secretary. I'm not being sexist about job roles and suitability based on gender or anything like that, because I knew that if this man could survive as Brandon's secretary, then he must be extremely good at his job. It was just a little surprising. Please follow me, Mr. Brandon is working in his office, the man said a little hesitantly. I wasn't certain, but it seemed like something was troubling Kenneth. That coupled with the fact that Brandon is not here. Kenneth led me into Brandon's office and gestured towards the large table where Brandon was busy typing away on his computer. This sight was familiar, and I immediately knew what was going on. How long has he been like that? I asked immediately. My eyes stared at Brandon, who was busy typing away like a lunatic on his laptop. Although we had entered his office, he didn't acknowledge our presence at all. His eyes never left his laptop screen as his fingers continued typing at an astonishing speed on his keyboard. It was like his eyes couldn't see anything but the work right in front of him, and that was probably the truth. I knew well that when he became like this, he didn't care about anything else besides his work, and that included his own health as well. It was like he was now operating in a completely different world, and the reality of our world did not matter to him at all. It had been years since I've last seen Brandon like this. The last time that he was like this, he almost landed himself in the hospital. I'm not sure, but my guess would be around 2 days. Kenneth replied in a shaky voice. When was the last time that he ate? I asked as I suspected the worst. I'm not sure, that I don't think he's eaten since this started. Kenneth replied. It was clear that Kenneth didn't know what to do with Brandon when he entered his zone like this. I was so thankful for my sleep last night, because I was going to need all the energy that I had to pull Brandon back from his zone. I walked over to Brandon's side, and I knew right away that although he was physical sitting there, his mind was somewhere far away. Brandon. I called his name and waited. After 5 seconds of complete silence, I called his name again, louder this time. Once again, completely no response or any signs that he had heard me. Kenneth, can you get some food for Brandon? Anything that's easy to eat with your hands. Like food that is in small pieces that can be put directly in his mouth without him having to bite it. You know. I instructed, trying my best to explain. Yes, right away. Kenneth replied before quickly heading out of the room. I stared at Brandon's face and the dark circles that had formed under his eyes. The worst part about this was that although his brain could take it, his body always had a problem keeping up with him. He'll end up overworking himself and his body will end up suffering the after effects. Wait for me, Brandon. I said to him before turning away and heading to the pantry. It's got to be here somewhere. There's a coffee machine, so there's coffee, but what about the other ingredients that I need? Here we go. I opened the cupboard and finally found what I was looking for. Then I need fresh milk, which I found in the fridge. This should work out. With the mug of coffee in my hand, I headed back to Brandon's office. Not surprisingly, I found him in the exact same place and doing the exact same thing just like before I had left him. I grabbed a chair and placed it directly next to his before sitting down on it. I sucked in a deep breath and began blowing on the coffee to cool it down to a drinkable temperature. I took a little sip to test if it was warm enough before slowly placing the rim of the cup against Brandon's lips. He didn't react in any way to my action, but slowly, he began sipping the coffee. I closed my eyes and sighed softly before reopening my eyes again to focus on getting the angle of the cup right. Slowly, Brandon sipped on the coffee, and I watched him in silence. Some things never change, and thankfully so, otherwise, I wouldn't know what to do in this situation. Brandon's eyes were still glued to the screen and his fingers were still moving frantically on the keyboard. The sound of his typing filled my ears and I found it calming. It was a familiar sound that filled our bedroom when we were living together. He worked very hard back then too. Looking at his screen, I could tell that he was coding. What exactly he was coding, I didn't know. After a while, Brandon almost completely finished the cup of coffee. By that time, my arm was partially numb, and I slowly pulled the cup again from his lips. Brandon blinked rapidly a couple of times before turning to look at me. He seemed a little surprised to see me there. Elena, he whispered as his eyes came to focus on my face. Welcome back, Brandon, I said before offering him a smile. I stared deeply into his beautiful gray eyes as he looked up at me with a mix of confusion and exhaustion. The dark circles under his eyes are much worse than I thought now that I can see them up close. Brandon needs to rest, and soon. The peace and quiet around us was disturbed by the loud sound of the door opening. I turned to see Kenneth walking in with bags of food in his arms. To be continued. Chapter 88. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 88. Feeding a CEO, time to take a break and eat, I announced loudly. I'm working, he replied coldly. At least he wasn't oblivious to my existence, which was a huge leap forward. Now I just need to get his attention and convince him to stop working, even if it was just for a second. Brandon, please eat your food. You also need to rest. Kenneth told me that you've been working for 2 days straight already, I said firmly without willing to back down. Feed me, he said passively. Stop working and eat yourself, I snapped. I'm working. Feed me or I won't eat at all, he replied without a care. Some things really never change. I had to feed and take care of Brandon as if he was a baby when he got like this back in the days too. No wonder Kenneth couldn't do anything to help Brandon in this situation. I could feed him, but that wasn't a sustainable solution at all. What if I wasn't here the next time that this happened? How had he been living all this time since we broke up? Who took care of him? I looked down at Brandon, who was still working like his life and the world's survival depended on it. Everyone who saw him now would think that he was a crazy workaholic. However, I bet everyone would think differently if they knew that this was how he built his empire from scratch. Can't you get someone else to do this? You have thousands of employees now, surely, one of them can code. I suggested. Not as good as I can, he replied without looking at me. Well, I guess that's true, but you can't keep on doing all the important stuff yourself, I replied. I've delegated most things already, just let me do what I want, okay, he replied, sounding a little irritated. Only if you sleep and eat enough. Your secretary is worried sick, and he's been pestering me to straighten you out, I said, referring to Kenneth. Are you worried? Brandon asked. What? I said softly, not quite sure what he was getting at. Are you worried about me, Elena? Brandon asked while continuing to code. Well, yes. So, can you stop working now? I asked as I placed a hand on his shoulder. Brandon sighed loudly and I wanted to scream in joy and let the world know that Brandon has finally lifted his hands off the keyboard. Everyone. Brandon's hands fell to his side as he turned in his chair to face me. He looked dead tired but still very handsome. 10 minutes, he muttered. I knew exactly what that meant. 10 minutes break, that's all. That's not enough. I began complaining immediately. Your time starts now. You have 10 minutes, what do you want me to do? He asked absent-mindedly. Shit. I ran to the table where the food was, grabbed it and came straight back to his side. Eat now. I ordered. Brandon smirked at me before opening his mouth a little so that I could feed him. I ripped open the box of food that Kenneth had bought. Thankfully, he managed to follow my instructions and the steak and vegetables were diced into small pieces. One by one, I fed the food into Brandon's mouth while he chewed as necessary and swallowed. I could feel Kenneth's eyes on us and knew that he was probably very surprised by what he was seeing. After the 10 minutes were over, Brandon automatically reverted to work mode and continued coding. It was driving me crazy. When will he be done with all this? When will you be done? I asked. An hour. Max, he replied monotonously. Okay. I'll wait for you here, I said with a firm nod. I turned around to find Kenneth staring at me with his mouth hanging open. I flashed him a smile to reassure him that everything was okay before I headed towards the sofa and sat down. Since arriving here, I haven't done much, but I felt so drained of energy. Dealing with Brandon wasn't easy, but I looked forward to his amazing creation just like I always did. Kenneth took a seat on the sofa opposite from me before he smiled warmly at me. I nodded at him as if to thank him for helping out. Brandon mentioned that he would need at most another hour, so I fully expected him to be done soon. No wonder you are his girlfriend, you are a genius at dealing with Mr. Brandon, Kenneth said with an appreciative smile. Haha, not really. It's nothing. I'm sure anyone can do as much. I replied smoothly. I don't think so. You might not know it, but most people find it very challenging to interact with Mr. Brandon, and when he gets like that, no one can get to him at all. Even though I'm his secretary, and have been for a while, it is still impossible for me to handle him, Kenneth said admittingly. Honestly, I wasn't surprised that no one could deal with Brandon. He was just that difficult and incredibly unique. I heard that you used to date Mr. Brandon before when you were both in university, Kenneth said. Yes, that's right. I'm his girlfriend now and also his ex-girlfriend, I affirmed with a small laugh. Mr. Brandon finished his coffee. Did you make it for him? Kenneth inquired. Yes, I did. I replied. Well, if you don't mind, since we have some time to kill, could you show me how to make it? Kenneth asked, sounding a little shy. You mean, how to make coffee? I asked with surprise. Yes, if you don't mind. You see, Mr. Brandon isn't a fan of any coffee as far as I'm aware, but he seemed to like yours, Kenneth replied. Oh, sure. I agreed before smiling a little at him. He was right, we had time to kill while we waited for Brandon to wrap up his work. Plus, the coffee recipe isn't supposed to be a secret or anything. When I'm not here, it'll probably help Brandon if Kenneth can make coffee for him. Kenneth and I made our way to the pantry nearby where I made coffee for Brandon before, and I started teaching him how to make my special Brandon coffee. To be continued. Chapter 89. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 89. The way he likes it. Essentially, it's not really what people would consider coffee. It's basically coffee mixed with a lot of whole milk and a lot of sugar. The key thing is to make it as sweet and creamy as possible so that it sort of tastes like coffee ice cream. You know, the coffee ice cream that even little kids could enjoy because it's just so sweet. I explained as I brought out the ingredients that I had used earlier. Kenneth watched me as I made black coffee from the machine before pouring in whole milk and mixing in loads of sugar. I turned to smile at him only to find that he had a ghastly expression on his face. It was like he didn't want to believe the thing that he was seeing. Are you serious? I never knew that he liked his coffee like this. Kenneth exclaimed before trailing off. It's not common, I guess. It's so sweet and milky that it's not really like coffee anymore. Would you like a taste? I offered, followed by a giggle. Kenneth seemed surprised for a bit, but then his expression softened, and he nodded before taking the cup from my hand. I wasn't trying to be mean, but I was curious to see Kenneth's reaction from drinking coffee the way that Brandon liked it. I watched as Kenneth took a sip from the cup and then his eyes immediately widened. In the next moment, he started sputtering on his coffee before coughing quite loudly. He stroked a hand on his chest as he tried to calm himself. Is it that bad? I asked, unable to keep in my laughs although Kenneth seemed to be suffering a little. Well, it's not ordinary, I guess. Kenneth mumbled as he stared at the content in the cup. Don't worry. No one should be drinking stuff like this besides Brandon, I said before smiling at him reassuringly. When we made our way back from the pantry to Brandon's office, we found him collapsed face down on his table. Kenneth was shocked and ran in immediately to check whether or not Brandon was still alive. I was more relaxed about it since it was a sight that I was used to. I knew that he didn't die or anything like that. He just passed out from overwork, which I guess may still be a big deal. He probably just fell asleep, I said calmly. Really? I was so shocked. I thought he had a heart attack or something. Kenneth said as he wiped sweat from his brows. He seemed truly shocked, and I wondered if this was his first time seeing Brandon like this. For me, it wasn't something new. This happened quite a lot when he was working hard to start this company. I honestly still think that what he did and managed to pull off was extremely impressive. Maybe we should take him back home, Kenneth suggested. I'm okay, I mumbled as I was forced to go along. I didn't even know where Brandon lived right now. I always met him here at the office and I realized that I didn't know much about him and his personal life anymore. I'll drive you two there. Thank heavens you are here with him today, Miss Elena. I wouldn't know what to do without you, seriously. Please help take care of Mr. Brandon until he feels better. Also, please don't tell anyone about this, it could affect the stock price if news or rumors leak out, Kenneth warned sternly. Right. Of course. I murmured in reply. Kenneth and few bodyguards did the perfect job of transporting Brandon to the car. Kenneth gestured for me to sit in the back seat, and I obediently followed his instruction. Brandon was placed in the car next to me. The moment the car started moving, Brandon lay down with his head landing on my lap. I peered at his sleeping face before I shook my head slightly to myself. I couldn't believe that he's still sleeping with all that's going on. Brandon slept like the dead with his head pillowed on my lap without stirring all the way until we arrived at his place. The car parked in front of one of the most prestigious high-rise condominiums in the city center. It didn't surprise me that someone like Brandon would live in a place like this. Guessing that it was probably best to act like I've been here before as to not blow our covers, I started going with the flow as I followed Kenneth and the others inside the building. The bodyguards support a sleeping Brandon and we entered a private elevator that only led to the one floor. The highest floor in the building. Great, Brandon lives in a penthouse. No surprises there. The elevator opened and there a well-decorated entryway that led to a very large living room with a magnificent view of the city. The view was truly breathtaking and so was the fact that there was only one unit on this entire floor, which meant that Brandon owned the entire floor. Sweet. This was truly like Brandon. This wasn't a blunt display of his wealth alone but also a clear display of his anti-social self. Brandon hated living with other people, which made the years we spent together in that small and regular apartment a very weird part in his life's history. Maybe you guys can put him in bed. I'm sure that he needs the rest and it'll be a while before he wakes up, I suggested before smiling politely at the bodyguards. Yes, right away, one of the guards replied politely before supporting Brandon's body in the direction of his bedroom. I followed close behind to make sure that Brandon would get to his bed safely. After they placed Brandon into bed and helped remove his shoes, I thanked them. We'll head back then. Have a restful day. I hope Mr. Brandon gets a chance to catch up on his sleep, Kenneth said as he nodded at me. Of course. I'll be here with him, so you don't need to worry, I replied kindly. To be continued. Chapter 90. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 90. Can't leave him. I waved goodbye to them as I ushered them into the elevator. Once the door of the elevator closed, I let out a loud sigh. Finally, they were gone, and I can drop this overly concerned girlfriend act. It was very tiring for me to be acting on top of being seriously worried about Brandon. Brandon's apartment was decorated luxuriously in tones of gray with matching white and gray marble and hints of gold here and there. It was very modern and very Brandon. It also matches the tone used in his office, which was also just like him to match up everything. I headed back to his bedroom to check up on him. I wished that he would just sleep the whole day away because that was what he needed the most right now. Slowly, I opened the door to his bedroom and peeked in to see that Brandon had not moved. He was still laying in the same position as before on his back. I walked into the bedroom, careful not to make any sound that could risk waking up Brandon from his peaceful slumber. So much light was shining in from outside through the large floor-to-ceiling glass panes. I walked towards it as I admired the view of the city from up here. The view was breathtakingly beautiful. As expected of a top-tier penthouse on one of the highest residential skyscrapers. This place probably costed Brandon a small fortune. My eyes lingered on the view for a brief moment longer before I reached for the curtain controller and pressed on the button to command it to close. The curtains slowly closed from both sides and the light shining into the room narrowed until no more light shone inside. The dark gray curtain kept out all the light and now the room was almost pitch black. This was indeed very ideal for sleeping. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and began making my way to switch on a lamp that was located next to the bed. Warm orange light lit up the room in a lazy glow once the lamp was switched on. This shouldn't disturb Brandon, and it gave me enough light for me to see. Now as for the main task at hand, I looked down at Brandon's sleeping form on the bed. I approached the bed and Brandon started to stir in his sleep. No surprise there, he wasn't sleeping in the most comfortable or normal position right now. I guess, I should try to at least remove his suit jacket and put a pillow under his head. After that, I planned to leave this place immediately. Brandon wouldn't wake up any time soon anyways. Carefully, I sat down on the edge of the bed next to Brandon's head. He's still sleeping, he must be very tired after working non-stop for so long. My eyes lingered on his face, taking in his attractive features. His nose, lips, even his closed eyes, everything about him were still as attractive as I had remembered in my mind. I used to watch him while he slept like this back then too. If I reached out my hand and stroked his hair, he would smile automatically even when he was still sleeping. I wondered if he would react the same way if I stroked his hair now. Carelessly, my right hand began inching towards his hair. Just before his hair brushed against my fingertips, I quickly pulled my hand back in panic. That was close. What was I thinking just now? I shouldn't touch him like that anymore. I must have lost my mind just now as the old memories of our time together came flooding back. That was so dangerous. I closed my eyes and counted to 10 silently in my mind to gather my wits and my control. He's not the same Brandon from back then anymore, and neither was I the Elena from back then. Most importantly, we're not dating for real anymore. When I opened my eyes again, I felt very calm and collected. That's right, that was then, and this is now. Without hesitation, my hand reached out and began patiently tugging at his suit as I tried to remove it from his upper body. Every now and then, I would glance nervously at his sleeping face to make sure that he was still sleeping. It was a struggle, and it took much longer than I initially thought, but finally, I succeeded in removing Brandon's suit from him. I reached towards the head of the bed and grabbed a pillow. Slowly, I placed my hand under his head, feeling the texture of his soft ash blonde hair against my hand as I lifted his head up slightly before quickly slipping the pillow under his head. Perfect. Finally, I did it. I looked down at Brandon's sleeping form now and was satisfied at the result of my efforts. He should be able to sleep well in this position without waking up with muscles aches here and there. I should leave now, there's nothing for me to do here now anyways. Good night, Brandon. Gently, I began moving to get off the bed. However, just as I turned around, something wrapped itself around my waist and began pulling me back. I looked down in shock as I realized that Brandon's arms were wrapped around my waist and hugging me. He began pulling me back in one swift motion. My body landed with a small thud against something warm and hard. His arms around me tightened very quickly, pulling me firmly into his embrace and holding me. The hardness of his muscular body pressed close to my back as his arms wrapped me to him. Brandon. I whispered his name in shock. Turning my head around to look at him, I saw that his eyes were still closed. Is he still sleeping? Is he doing this in his sleep? Brandon didn't respond to me, however, he lifted a leg over my thighs and wrapped it around my body. My eyes narrowed at the funny situation that I had found myself in. He's using me as his body pillow now. This is crazy. To be continued.